"You're not invited, sir." The usher's tone was sharp. The old man nodded quietly, stepping aside. He didn't argue, didn't ask for a seat. He just stood at the back outside the garden fence, holding a small wrapped box. Until the bride turned to take photos, and her eyes landed on the patch stitched to his sleeve. Everything stopped. Comment, respect the patch if this moment froze you too. The Willow Creek Gardens bloomed in perfect June splendor. White roses arched over trellis pathways. Fairy lights twined through manicured hedges. Nature and human hands had conspired to create the ideal wedding backdrop. Everything precisely as planned, precisely as paid for. Arthur Art Simmons had left his small apartment at dawn. 2 bus transfers, a long wait in the midday heat, then a half-mile walk with knees that protested every step. By the time he reached the venue's outer gate, his dress shirt, pressed the night before with careful attention, clung to his back with perspiration. He didn't mind. At 82, discomfort was an old companion. Art adjusted his jacket, a garment preserved for decades, yet worn only on the most solemn occasions. The fabric had faded from deep navy to a gentler blue, but it remained dignified, like its owner. His shoes, polished to a respectable shine, reflected clouds drifting overhead. And on his left sleeve, a patch 1st Cavalry Division, sewn with stitches, small and precise enough to suggest military discipline, preserved through civilian years. He arrived in early, positioned himself carefully beside the hedge bordering the ceremony area. Not intrusive, just present. In his pocket, a handkerchief. In his hands, a small box wrapped in silver paper corners, meticulously creased, a white ribbon, tied with the precision of someone who understood that presentation matters. A woman in a flowing dress approached, clipboard in hand. She smiled, the professional smile of someone managing logistics. "Good afternoon. Are you with the bride or groom?" Art returned the smile gently. "Neither, ma'am. I'm here for someone who can't be." Her smile faltered slightly, uncertainty crossing her features. "I'm sorry, but..." A security guard in a dark blazer appeared at her shoulder. "Is there a problem?" "This gentleman." She glanced at her list. "Name, sir." The guard's tone remained courteous but firm. "Arthur Simmons. I served with her father. I just wanted to deliver this." He indicated the small package in his weathered hands. The security guard frowned. "I'm sorry, but the guest list is strictly enforced. Family only." An usher, younger and less diplomatic, stepped forward. "Sir, you'll need to move away from the ceremony area." Art nodded, accepting without protest. "I understand." He stepped back, positioning himself behind the decorative white fencing that separated the venue from public space. Still visible, but clearly outside the boundaries of belonging. He stood with the straight posture of a man who had once stood at attention for things that mattered. Inside, music began. Guests seated themselves, programs fluttering like butterflies in manicured hands. Photographs were arranged, first the groom and groomsmen, then family combinations cataloged by the photographer's practice commands. When the bride turned for her portrait against the garden backdrop, her gaze drifted beyond the photographer, beyond the guests, to the solitary figure standing quietly outside the fence. Her eyes found the patch on his sleeve, and everything changed. "Wait!" The bride's voice cut through the photographer's instructions. Her hand, mid-gesture, froze in the air. The photographer lowered his camera. "Is something wrong, Ms. Holloway?" She didn't answer. Instead, she gathered her ivory skirts, yards of delicate fabric and meticulous beadwork, and moved with unexpected purpose toward the fence. Guests turned, murmuring in confusion. "Excuse me," she called, her voice carrying across the manicured lawn. "Sir, is that the 1st Cav?" Art straightened, slightly, his eyes widening at being directly addressed. He nodded once, a gesture precise in its economy. "Did you know Staff Sergeant Mark Holloway?" Her voice held a strange urgency that silenced the confused whispers around her. Something shifted in Art's weathered face, a recognition, a memory surfacing. "He saved my life. Twice. 1970. The bride's composure broke. Tears welled, immediately spilling onto cheeks carefully painted for photographs. "That was my father." The gathering went silent. The photographer lowered his camera completely. The wedding planner froze mid-stride, clipboard clutched against her chest. The usher, who had earlier dismissed Art, now approached, anxiety evident in his hurried steps. "Ma'am, we can handle this." "No," she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for debate. "You already handled it. Wrong." She reached across the fence, her white-gloved hand extending toward Art's weathered one. You were invited the day he didn't come back. Without waiting for assistance, she pushed through the small gate in the decorative fence. Standing before him now, her wedding dress symbol of new beginnings contrasted sharply with Art's jacket testament to promises kept across decades. She turned to address the assembled guests, her voice steady, despite the tears still tracing her cheeks. Everyone, this man wore the same uniform my father did, and my father wanted to be here more than anything. Her voice broke slightly before regaining strength. He can't, but he can. Gently, she guided Art through the gate and into the ceremony space. A groomsman immediately vacated his chair in the front row. The mother of the bride, a woman with familiar eyes set in an older face, pressed her hand to her mouth, recognition and grief mingling in her expression. The groom, a man whose name Art didn't know, whose face he had never seen until this moment, stepped forward and extended his hand with a respectful nod. Art reached into his pocket and withdrew the small silver package. I promised Mark I'd deliver this when the time came. Been holding it 40 years. With trembling fingers, the bride unwrapped it. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and a silver pendant with her name, Rebecca, delicately engraved on its face. Rebecca unfolded the letter, her hands shaking. She began to read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. If you're reading this, I didn't make it home, but I never stopped thinking of your first day in white. Her voice failed. The letter words from a father who had held her as an infant but would never see her as a bride trembled in her hands. She looked up at Art, this stranger who had carried her father's last gift across years and miles, and without warning embraced him fiercely. Throughout the garden, guests rose to their feet. The applause began softly, then swelled, not for the couple who would soon exchange vows, but for the promise kept by a man who had never been invited but belonged there nevertheless. The ceremony proceeded with Art seated in the front row beside the mother of the bride. Someone had affixed a boutonniere to his lapel, not planned for but seamlessly incorporated, as though the universe itself was correcting an oversight. Rebecca carried her father's letter and pendant down the aisle alongside her bouquet. The celebrant, sensing the shift in the ceremony's emotional landscape, added a moment of silence. For those who couldn't be here today, but remain in our hearts. After the vows and after the pronouncement and recessional, the celebration moved to a white tent glowing with string lights. Art found himself surrounded, not isolated as he had expected to be, but embraced by a community suddenly eager to hear his connection to a man many had never met. I didn't know her dad served, one guest commented, champagne flute in hand. We forget how many stories don't get told, another added. Art smiled gently. Sometimes they're not ours to tell, just to keep. As dinner commenced, Rebecca approached the microphone set up near the small band. Conversation quieted as she spoke. This seat at my table, she gestured to an empty chair decorated with white ribbons, is for my father. But today, it belongs to the man who carried his last gift. Art was escorted to the chair, a place of honor he had never sought but couldn't refuse. When servers distributed cake, Rebecca herself brought him the first slice. He would have wanted that, she said simply. Art ate quietly, answering questions when asked, but mostly observing. This had been Mark's dream, to see his daughter married to share this celebration. Art felt both honored to be included and acutely aware that his presence was at best a substitute for what should have been. The band struck up a slower melody. The dance floor cleared and Rebecca stood, extending her hand toward Art. It's time for the father-daughter dance, she said. Will you stand in for him? Art hesitated. I'm not much of a dancer anymore. Neither was he. She smiled through fresh tears. Carefully, with movements made deliberate by age, Art rose and accompanied her to the center of the dance floor. One hand held hers, the other rested lightly at her waist, respectful, almost formal. They moved in a small circle, not so much dancing as sharing a moment suspended in time. The room fell silent. Phones captured the moment, but many guests simply watched, tissues pressed to eyes. Later, as the celebration continued around him, the groom approached where Art sat, resting his tired legs. Why did you wait so long to come to give her the gift? Art considered the question. I wasn't sure she'd want me. Mark's been gone so long. Memories fade, people move on. The young man shook his head. Now you know. Yes, Art agreed quietly. Now I know. In the weeks that followed, wedding photos circulated online. Professional images captured the venue, the decorations, the cake, all the expected documentation of a joyful occasion. But one photograph spread beyond the couple's immediate circle, Rebecca in her wedding gown, tear tracks visible on her cheeks, head resting against Art's chest as they shared that dance. Her eyes were closed. His were open but distant, perhaps seeing another time, another place. A military veterans group shared the image with a simple caption, "He came, he kept his promise." The story traveled further than anyone expected. Donations appeared for organizations supporting war widows and children. Messages poured in from other veterans who had carried similar promises. What began as one man's quiet determination to honor a fallen friend became something larger, a reminder that some bonds transcend time, distance, even death itself. Art Simmons passed away in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in autumn, 2 years after Rebecca's wedding. His small apartment was orderly, modest, much like the man himself. On his bedside table, a framed photograph of himself with Rebecca on her wedding day, her hand clasping his arm where the first cavalry patch still rested. The obituary was brief. No surviving family, military service noted. And one line added by Rebecca herself, "He delivered more than a gift, he delivered presence when absence was all we had known." At his funeral, larger than anyone might have predicted, Rebecca stood to speak, her hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly. "He came to my wedding alone," she said, her voice steady, "but he left with all of us." Around her neck hung the silver pendant her father had entrusted to Art decades earlier. In her home, her father's letter was framed beside his carefully folded flag. 6 months later, when Rebecca's daughter was baptized, a small chair stood near the font. Tied to it, a handwritten note, reserved for those who kept their word. No one sat in it, but everyone saw it. Some looked away quickly, blinking back sudden emotion. Others nodded in silent understanding. Art had carried one promise to completion. Now his memory itself had become something carried forward, a reminder that legacy isn't always about grand gestures or famous deeds. Sometimes it's just about showing up, standing quietly, waiting as long as necessary, and trusting that eventually someone will recognize what you've been carrying all along. Subscribe to Wounds and Honor if you believe not all heroes wear invitations, some wear patches.